The wind in the west was merciless, carrying not only dust but whispers. In a land where men measured worth by the weight of cattle, the size of their guns, and the promise of sons, there was no mercy for a woman who failed to give them what they craved most: ears to carry the family name. And so, in a crumbling shack at the edge of a town that barely tolerated her presence, a woman named Clara lay broken on the dirt floor, her arms wrapped tightly around 3 small daughters, as if the warmth of her embrace could shield them from a world already set against their existence. Her husband had left first. He'd stormed out the night the 3rd girl was born, leaving behind nothing but the smell of whiskey and the sound of his boots pounding against the porch. He never returned. To the townfolk, that was proof enough. Clara was a curse. A woman who could only bear daughters was a burden, a punishment, a wasted womb. The whispers turned into shouts, shouts into fists. The men of the town said she was useless. Her neighbors called her a sinner, and even the women crossed the street when she appeared. For months, Clara endured. She endured the hunger, the sneers, the silence when she begged for work. She endured until the night they came for her. It wasn't the law. It wasn't even her own blood. It was just townsfolk, drunk on cruelty, who dragged her into the street beneath the pale lantern light. They called it justice, though there was nothing just about it. They beat her for daring to live, for daring to keep her daughters alive. The blows landed hard. The world spun. The children screamed. And when the crowd finally dispersed, Clara was left in the mud, her daughters huddled against her body, trembling and wide-eyed. The town went back to its silence, satisfied that the woman and her girls would not last another night. But dawn came, and with it, the sound of hooves on the horizon. A lone rider, tall in the saddle, slowed his horse as he passed the edge of town. His name was Elias Turner, a rancher who had lived too long with silence for company. He lost a wife years ago to fever, lost an unborn son before the child even drew breath. Since then, he had spoken little, kept to his land, and let loneliness eat at him like rust on iron. Yet, when his eyes fell upon the scene in the dirt, a bruised woman clutching 3 small girls who had nothing but rags for blankets, something stirred. He reined in his horse and sat there for a long while, watching, listening. He had no business stopping. She was not his kin, not his problem, but Elias knew the look in Clara's eyes, even from a distance. It was the look of someone already halfway into the grave, yet still clawing to protect what little remained of her soul. He dismounted, boots sinking into the mud, and the girls flinched at his shadow. Clara lifted her head, blood on her lip, eyes glassy with exhaustion and shame. She expected another blow, another curse, another order to leave. But Elias only stood there, silent, heavy, unmoving, when he finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, carrying more weight than the night itself. "Come with me," he said. 3 words. Nothing more. But to Clara, broken and abandoned, they sounded like a lifeline thrown across a river of death. She did not answer at once. Fear was stronger than hope, but the girls clung to her arms, and their tiny hands told her what words could not. And so, with trembling legs and eyes that still doubted she deserved salvation, Clara rose from the mud. Elias Turner held out his hand, not demanding, not pulling, simply offering. She placed her hand in his, and for the first time in years, the world did not feel entirely against her. Behind them, the town watched from cracked windows and doorways. Whispers spread again, but no one dared interfere. The rancher was a man known for silence, and in that silence, there was danger. As the horse carried them away from the edge of town, Clara looked back only once. The place they had tried to bury her now seemed smaller, weaker. Ahead, there was no promise, only uncertainty. But even uncertainty was better than the certainty of death. And so began a story not of love at first sight, but of survival, of broken souls stitched together by need, of strangers bound by the weight of daughters, and the quiet command of a lonely rancher who could not look away. The journey from the edge of town to Elias Turner's ranch was not far in miles. For Clara and her daughters, it felt like a crossing between worlds. The road wound through silent plains, where the grass swayed like an ocean under the wind, and shadows of hawks circled high above. Clara sat stiffly in the saddle behind Elias, one arm holding her youngest against her chest. The other pressed around the shoulders of her two older girls, who rode, nestled against her sides. Every jolt of the horse's hooves reminded her of bruises, not yet healed, but she did not complain. Silence hung heavy. Elias did not speak. His presence was not warm, nor was it cruel. It was simply steady, like stone. Clara found herself clinging not to comfort, but to the simple fact that for once no hand was raised against her. As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view. It was no grand estate, just a house of timber weathered by storms, a barn leaning with age, and acres of land fenced by rails, half rotted and half mended. But to Clara's eyes, it looked like something close to heaven. The girls whispered to each other, their small voices breaking the hush. "Mama, is this home?" Home? Clara dared not answer. She did not yet know what Elias Turner intended. A man could offer words on impulse, then cast them aside by morning. She had seen it before. When they arrived, Elias swung down from the saddle and offered his hand again. Clara hesitated, then took it. He lifted her gently, as though he knew the weight of her broken ribs without being told. The girls scrambled down after wide-eyed at the sight of chickens scratching the dirt, the smell of hay, the sound of a horse snorting from the corral. The ranch house door creaked when Elias pushed it open. Inside was simple: wooden table, iron, stove, a bed against the far wall, shelves with tools and books that had gathered more dust than use. For years it had been a house for one. The silence in its walls carried the memory of absence. Clara stood at the threshold, uncertain. She expected orders to cook, to clean, to earn her keep immediately. But Elias only said, "You and the girls stay here tonight." That was all. No explanation, no demand. He left her standing there, vanishing into the barn to tend his horse. Clara's hands trembled as she guided her daughters inside. The girls clung to each other, nervous, yet their eyes sparkled with curiosity as they explored the small room. To them, this house already felt safer than the town that had spit them. Out, that night, Clara could not sleep. She lay awake on the floor near the hearth, her daughters curled against her like kittens, while Elias rested in the bed. The firelight flickered across his face, carved with years of loneliness and grief. She wondered why he had brought her here, why a man like him, silent and unyielding, would choose to burden himself with a woman beaten down and 3 daughters who carried no promise of sons. But in the stillness of the night, he remembered his voice, "Come with me," and the way he had not pulled, not forced, but simply offered. Perhaps that was reason enough. Days turned into weeks. Life on the ranch was not easy. Elias worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences, breaking horses, hauling feed. Clara, bruises, fading slowly, forced her body to rise each morning and tend to what she could, cooking, patching clothes, sweeping dust that seemed endless. The girls fetched water, fed chickens, and began to laugh again in the yard, their voices breaking the silence that had haunted the ranch for years. Elias never said much. In silence, worked in silence, slept in silence. Yet every so often, Clara caught him watching the girls from the corner of his eye, as though trying to remember the sound of a child's laughter after so long without it. Trust did not come quickly. Clara flinched whenever a shadow moved too fast. The girls clung, to her whenever Elias drew near. Quote, but he never raised his voice, never lifted a hand. His quiet patience, like water wearing down stone, began to carve space in their hearts. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Clara stood on the porch, her daughters playing in the yard. Elias came beside her, leaning on the rail. For a long while, neither spoke. Then he said, his voice rough from disuse, "They'll be safe here." It's just that. No promises of love, no talk of the future, but the words settled in Clara's chest like a weight lifted. She nodded, unable to speak, tears burning her eyes as she watched her daughters chase each other through the tall grass. The ranch, once silent as a grave, now echoed with footsteps, with voices, with life. Hey, and though Elias Turner remained a man of few words, each passing day made clear that his decision had not been impulse, but the world beyond those fences had not forgotten. Clara, the town, had not forgiven her. And some men, when they see a woman they cast aside rise again, cannot bear the insult. Dark days were coming. The kind of days when silence would no longer be enough. The ranch became a place of rhythm. At dawn, the rooster crowed, the sun crept over the hills, and Elias was already outside, tightening ropes, checking the cattle, and moving with the patience of a man who had built his life around routine. Clara woke with the girls, their small hands tugging at her dress, their voices asking for breakfast. The sound of their chatter filled the cabin in ways it had never been filled before. For the first time in years, Clara began to breathe without the weight of constant fear pressing on her lungs. The bruises faded, though their memory never left. She found herself sweeping floors that no longer smelled of spilled whiskey, cooking meals from mouths that laughed instead of cursed, and tucking her daughters into blankets that didn't have to shield them from fists. Elias said little, but his silence carried a strange comfort. He never demanded, never complained. He ate what she cooked, fixed what she mended, and gave the girls the space to run free in the fields. At night, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, while Clara stitched clothes by hand. It was a fragile kind of peace, the kind that could shatter with one careless word, but it was peace nonetheless. And yet, shadows do not vanish so easily. Clara could feel the eyes of the town, even from afar. When she rode to fetch supplies with Elias, she felt the whispers cling to her like smoke. Women in bonnets turned away. Men smirked and spat at the ground as she passed. The cursed woman, the one who bore only daughters. But now she was not alone. Beside her sat the rancher, whose silence had weight enough to quiet any insult. None dared raise a hand when Elias was near. And still, she knew hatred does not sleep forever. The girls thrived in their own small ways. Anna, the eldest at 8, took quickly to the routines of ranch life, following Elias at a distance, copying the way he carried wood, the way he checked the fence line. Miriam, the middle child, laughed the loudest, running barefoot through the yard, chasing chickens with reckless joy. And the youngest, Grace, still clung to her mother's skirts, her wide eyes always searching Clara's face for reassurance that the world would not take her away. Elias noticed. Oh, he said little. One evening, Clara caught him whittling a small wooden horse. Case, his hands were rough, clumsy, but patient. He left it on the porch rail the next morning without a word. Miriam found it first, squealing with delight. Clara said nothing, but she saw the faintest trace of a smile tug at Elias's lips before he turned back to his chores. The girls began to call him Mr. Elias, not father. Not yet, but Clara noticed how his eyes softened whenever the title slipped from their mouths. Still, Clara lived with caution. At night, when the girls were asleep, she lay awake, listening for hoofbeats in the distance, for voices calling her name with venom. She knew the world did not forgive women like her, women who survived when they were meant to be destroyed. And her fears proved true. It began with a message. A crude mark carved into the barn door. 3 lines crossed out by a single stroke. A symbol she recognized from the men who had dragged her into the street that night. A warning, a reminder that they hadn't finished what they started. Elias studied it silently, his jaw tight, his hand resting on the handle of the knife at his belt. Clara stood behind him, trembling, clutching Grace to her chest. "They won't forget," she whispered. "They won't forgive me." Elias turned, his eyes hard as flint. "Let them come." It wasn't bravado. It was a statement, plain and steady, like everything else about him. Clara wanted to believe those words, but fear had deep roots, and hers had been watered by years of cruelty. Days later, they came again, not with fists this time, but with fire. Clara woke in the night to the acrid smell of smoke. Outside, the barn roof glowed orange, flames licking skyward. Elias was already running, hauling water, his body moving with furious strength. Clara pulled her daughters into the yard, shielding their faces from the sparks. Together, she and Elias fought the fire until dawn, their hands blistered, their clothes blackened with soot. When it was done, the barn still stood, though scarred and half-charred. The cattle were safe. But Clara knew this was only the beginning. The town had marked her. And now, by sheltering her, Elias Turner had marked himself. That morning, as the sun rose pale and weak through the smoke, Clara stood with her daughters. At her side, her body trembling not from exhaustion, but from certainty. The past was not finished with her. The men who had tried to erase her would not rest until they had. But for the first time, she was not alone in the fight. The lonely rancher who once lived only for silence now had something worth protecting. And when men are given something to protect, they did not let go easily. The days after the fire were heavy with silence. Elias rebuilt the barn plank by plank, his hands blistered, his jaw clenched, while Clara kept the girls close, never letting them stray beyond the fence. The laughter that had once returned, too. The ranch now came only in whispers, quickly swallowed by fear. Every creak of the windmill, every distant echo of hooves felt like a threat. Clara knew it was only a matter of time. The town did not forgive. Men who thrived on cruelty never left their work unfinished. It was dusk when the storm finally broke. The sky had turned blood red, the air thick with dust, when the sound of riders rolled across the plains like thunder. Clara stood on the porch, her heart pounding. Anna clutched her arm. Miriam hid behind her skirts, and Grace buried her face against her chest. Elias stepped out of the barn, shotgun in hand. His face was carved in stone, eyes fixed on the horizon as the riders drew near. 5 men, faces Clara recognized, even in the fading light, the same men who had dragged her into the street, who had spit on her daughter's cries, who had left her in the mud to die. They reined in their horses just beyond the fence. The leader, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar cutting across his cheek, leaned forward in his saddle and spat into the dirt. "Turner," he called, his voice carrying like a blade. "You've taken in what ain't yours. We're here to set things right." Elias didn't answer. Kay stood still, the shotgun steady in his hands, his silence louder than any threat. The man sneered. "She's a curse. Her and her brats. Whole town knows it. You'll give 'em up, or we'll burn this place down with you in it." Clara felt her knees weakened. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to give herself up if it meant sparing Elias and the girls. She opened her mouth to speak, but Elias stepped forward, his voice like iron striking stone. "This is my land. These are my people now. You'll not touch them." The words stunned Clara. He had spoken so little since the day she met him, and now his voice rang with a conviction she had never heard from any man before. The scarred leader laughed, though uneasily. "You think you can stand against all of us?" "Please the silence," was his answer. He cocked the shotgun. The metallic sound cracked through the air like thunder. The first shot came not from Elias, but from the men. A flash from a revolver, a crack that split the twilight. Bullets tore into the fence as Clara dragged her daughters to the floorboards of the porch, shielding them with her body. Elias moved like a force of nature. The shotgun roared. The leader's horse reared. The man toppled into the dust with a scream. Chaos erupted. Gunfire filled the air. Horses shrieked, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with the rising wind. Clara's heart hammered as she held her. Girls close, but through the haze of terror she saw Elias, a lone figure against many. His body moving with grim precision, his silence now turned into fury. Each shot he fired was measured, purposeful. 2 men fell, clutching their chests. The third turned to flee, only to be dragged from his saddle by Elias's hand and thrown into the dust. But the fight was not without cost. A bullet tore across Elias's shoulder, blood staining his shirt. He staggered, but did not fall. His eyes burned with the fire of a man who had already lost everything once and would not lose again. The last man standing, young, wild-eyed, trembling, raised his pistol toward the porch. Clara froze. For a moment, it felt as though all of time held its breath. Then, without thinking, she rose. Her hands, shaking but determined, grasped the old rifle Elias kept propped against the doorway. She had never fired a weapon before. But, in that instant, with her daughters behind her, something greater than fear guided her hands. The shot rang out. The young man dropped his pistol, clutching his arms, and fled into the gathering darkness, his horse kicking up a storm of dust as he vanished. Silence fell, heavy, unforgiving. The smell of blood lingered on the wind. Elias lowered his shotgun, breathing hard, his body marked by wounds and smoke. He looked at Clara, her hands still gripping the rifle, her chest heaving. For the first time, their eyes met, not as strangers, not as broken souls bound only by circumstance, but as equal survivors who had fought side by side. The girls crawled from their hiding place, clinging to their mother, their small faces streaked with tears. Clara gathered them close, then turned to Elias, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You saved us." Elias shook his head, blood dripping from his arm. "No, we saved each other." The bodies of the fallen men lay scattered across the dust, the sunset bleeding crimson over their still forms. The town would hear of this. They would whisper. They would curse Clara's name once more. But now, she was no longer the woman abandoned in the mud. She was the woman who had risen, the woman who had fought, the woman who had found shelter, not in the mercy of strangers, but in the strength of a man who had once been nothing more than silence. That night, when the fire crackled low and the girls slept with their arms wrapped around each other, Clara sat by Elias's side as she stitched the wound on his shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was no longer emptiness. It was understanding, and though the world beyond the ranch would remain cruel, within those fences a new life had begun. Not a perfect life, not an easy one, but one built from survival, from defiance, and from the unspoken vow of a lonely rancher who once said only 3 words that changed everything. "Come with me."